part 3 of my talk today, and hopefully fill up the piece that you all come to find out about. I'm going to take it for granted that you probably all know a fair bit about the Battle of Fromelles, apart from the fact that it was a disaster that involved casualties on a great scale. A number of disaster points were listed after the war by Brigadier General Elliott. A number of failings were identified, which basically could have been avoided. But the biggest thing after the Battle of Fromelles was the numbers. You've probably already heard, you know that many times the battle numbers quoted as 1,917 killed and 5,533 casualties overall. Well, when you see that, me being an ex-lawyer, you think, where do those numbers come from? And who put them together? Well, let me just take you through the course of how these things unfold. Because I'm going to suggest to you today that those numbers are underscored, they're underquoted. They don't really take the full picture into consideration. Now, just so, once upon a time, a TV podcast crowd called me up and wanted to talk about the Battle of Fromelles one year, and I could tell that they were a bunch of amateurs as soon as they said that there were 5,533 killed. And, hang on, no, there were 5,533 casualties. Different thing. Okay, something interrupted that telephone podcast, but no, it hadn't been called back yet. It was over 2 years ago. Anyway, I think events in the 7th of October in Israel took place, and that overrode that. Now, we know the Battle of Fromelles, there were soldiers killed in action. There were soldiers wounded in action who died from their wounds. And there were prisoners taken from the battle who may have been wounded in action or may not have been wounded in action. Some of those prisoners died of their wounds subsequently. They were all casualties. That's the important word, casualties. They were taken out of the fighting and they were no longer effective in battle terms. So the term casualties doesn't automatically mean deaths, but it does include the number of deaths from a battle. So you just look at the cause and effect and you work out how the statistics unfold, and then you can work out how you want to present that information. So out of the casualties, there were those who were wounded in the course of battle who were taken back from the front line to a regimental aid post, to a casualty clearing station, or to a hospital. Some would return to duty days or weeks later, some never did. So, again, how would you react if I told you there were 6,092 casualties, not 5,533? And the number of deaths, ultimately, that came about because of the battle was not 1,917, but 2,117. It's so wonderful who put these figures together. Okay, I'm going to take you through some charts now. You don't have to absorb all this in one go, but that's what I'm going to put through to you. The first details of any casualties being recorded was signed off on the 25th of July, 1916, when Major General James Whiteside Mackay signed off on those numbers. Now, I won't talk too much about him. He wasn't a friend of the soldiers apparently, but he wouldn't let them have the truce. Now, the important thing was the 25th of July. In the last part of the talk before, I mentioned that the 5th Division's war diary started on the 12th of July. You remember that? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the 12th. But the 25th is already a date after which the face-to-face combating had stopped. And there were soldiers who were being brought in from the battlefields under cover of darkness and all sorts of other nefarious ways so that the Germans wouldn't shoot everybody. And this is the breakdown of the numbers that were recorded by the 5th Division. Now, when you look at the killed in action figure, 506, it's nowhere near 1,917, is it? And the wounded in action is 3,327. Well, they're not deaths, but some of them could be. But there were still 1,700 missing. Now, in the days to come, those 1,700 would been reconstituted in some deaths, some wounded, some found to be taken as prisoners. So that is the first perception of how the numbers were unfolding. I'm going to come to another chart shortly, this one, which was put together in 1940, I believe, published in 1940 under a medical tabulation, Australian Medical History. Now, when that was put together, the notation was made that during the whole of the next week, after the 20th of July, parties or individuals went out by night and brought in men marked down during the day. From this original figure here. On the 27 July, for example, the 58th Battalion War Diary recorded that 2 men from the 14th Brigade come over our parapet, have been near German wire in the shell hole for a week. The Australian Medical History records note that the last was carried to Captain Rayson's aid post 9 days after wounding. He crawled into a shell hole, and though he could not reach the water, had kept himself alive by continuously soaking a strip of his tunic and soaking it. So that figure there, the 1700, very rubbery figure, isn't it? Could go anywhere. But the number 5533 is still the tally, which interestingly is used, or appears to be used, in other tallies later on. Now, the next, excuse me, next thing that happens is on the 2nd of August, the 5th Division Administrative Headquarters Diary. Jim Munro will tell you that's an absolute rabbit hole. There's much of Jim. Where's Jim? What did he say? Okay. That noted that there was a comprehensive table of the 5th Australian Division casualties, and the casualty table was condensed into a summary that we've got in front of you here. 6,106 casualties listed in it. Now remember what I said? You died in battle, you were wounded in action, you were taken off the battlefield, you were a prisoner. And according to the 5th Division, this is how the numbers unfolded from the 12th of July to the 31st of July. Now we know that in all of that time, some of those days were not in battle as such. They were just, the division was in place, and they recorded everyone that had been affected one way or another. Now, so the total casualties that the division had in its recordings here, 6,106, was going to be larger than it would have been due to the battle itself. Now, I've always looked, when you look at workers' compensation, look at injuries occurring because of some event, okay? In battles, you look at injuries occurring because of activity. The same sort of relationship happens here. Just because someone appears as a casualty or some statistic in the diary doesn't mean that they got that because they were in battle. So we just got to isolate those out and say, all right, they were somewhere else or not involved in the fighting. They don't actually form part of the numbers that we want for Fromelles. So this is what brought us to today's talk. We then find in 1929 through 1941, I don't have slide 4, Charles Benn published the official histories of the Australian War. Now he goes through and explains that he had a desire to give a true picture of the test of battle and to distribute the credit as widely as possible among those who deserve it. But he didn't give the number of soldiers killed in action or died of wounds. He just listed casualty numbers. He didn't break it down. Now that's interesting. Because other units, the division did, and as you'll see shortly, the medical history ones did, broke it into different categories. Now, Benn published his official history starting in 1929 with revisions up until 1941. The Australian medical history here was published in 1940. So that would suggest that Benn's figures in early editions were still evolving, and that this one might have been going on the same as well in parallel. But this is the one that seems to be settled upon when we've read every account of the Battle of Fromelles and the casualty numbers ever since. If you look at 1,701 and add 216 in the next column, you get 1,917. You know, you're looking at the numbers now, counting it up and saying, yep, he's right. So this is where most of the calculations have been quoted from. As I said, 1940. And they are really just a subset of what was recorded in the 5th Division's own records in August 1916. Just constituted slightly differently in how they come about. Now, what the Australian Medical History did in providing services in support, and when they wrote this, when they put this chart together, they also provided this comment. The casualties sustained in the operation are shown in the following table. They are a measure at once of the extraordinary medical problem and of the cost of the AIF of the faint. Really a subsidiary attack, wholly futile and unnecessary, made by inexperienced troops against unduly distant positions, with insufficient preparation, particularly by the artillery, which itself was insufficient for the enterprise. They represent a casualty list of 50% of the troops engaged. The table doesn't deal with the entirety of the battle. It only states numbers of soldiers killed, wounded or taken prisoner. Look at the time frame there, that's just above the chart. 19th of July, noon, 19 July, and 8 p.m. on 21st of July. Are they reliable figures? Are they truly reflective? Now, I'm going to suggest to you that if you take a more modern accounting approach, you would look at the activity leading up to, during, and to the conclusion of the activity simply to work out what it costs financially. Just say you're renovating a house and want to sell it. You've got to investigate it, you've got to do searches on it, you've got to do conveyancing on it, you've got to do hardware work, you've got to put labour and effort, and then you put it up for sale and you take what's left. Total cost of ownership of the project. Now, my belief is, therefore, when you look at this battle, it should also be looking at the preparations for it, not just what happened during it. So that takes us back to, I believe, the 14th of July when the first casualty started accumulating because of it. Even though we've been in place, the 5th Division was in charge from the 12th of July, our first casualty number started accumulating from the 14th. Now, that's the starting point. Now, if that's the starting point, then what's the appropriate range of dates for determining casualties? Well, we got some assistance for that by the actual Battles Nomenclature Committee, whose report was issued in 1921. They were convened to determine the formal classifications of all actions in which imperial units were engaged throughout the Great War. They considered, and I quote, that owing to the varying length of the preparatory action and the difficulty of fixing its actual commencement, this period should not be included. So it's too hard to say, but I think we can do it. But that 0 day, which is when cannons start firing, should be taken as the first day in all cases. Now this is the important part. That on the other hand, the period of consolidation after an attack should, as a general rule, be included. So we've got the classification group saying, okay, you can consider how long it took to clean up and move on, but don't bring in when you started from. That's contradictory to me, and I think it doesn't make any sense. So how far then do we go looking back as a period of consolidation, or how long do we go back to see when we started from? We know that battle orders were issued in relation to the battle itself taking place on the 17th. New battle orders were issued on the 22nd of July. So varying units continued to hold the front line until the 31st of July, after which the basis of activity being undertaken was completely different. We were moving on. So in determining the date by which the Battle of Fromelles was no longer in process, we also need to consider when the battle order ceased, by which date units involved were reassigned, and we can do that by examining brigade and unit diaries, and that date appears to be the 31st of July. Because after that, some of those battalions had moved out of the area, they were moving on to other places, but some were still engaged in basically clean-out work. So we go back to the unit diaries of the battalions, we go back to the brigade diaries, we go back to the division diaries, some of the Commonwealth War Grave death records. We find that there were soldiers killed and wounded at Fromelles up until the 31st of July. They were operating under the orders of the 22nd of July in consolidation of the battle order, and they should be counted as casualties as appropriate, where appropriate. So given what we know about the build-up to the battle and the consolidation after the battle, we can now say there were three sets, you sort of, three sets of figures that we need to look at in critical detail. First of all, period A, from the 14th of July to the 18th July, that's before the cannons started firing and after the soldiers had all got to the spot. Pre-battle period, looking at the 5th Division War Diaries, we can come up to, we find there were 450 casualties. Now, in that period of time, I have a quick subset tally. There were 65 killed, 371 wounded, and 14 missing. 65 killed. Now, I don't know if there's a lot of women here, and a lot of probably had children of their own, but if you told a mother that her son was killed before the 19th of July, but it doesn't count because it's not in the battle, what would you think of the person talking to you? You'd think he was a raving lunatic, and that's not how things work. So, between the 14th of July and the 18th of July, there were 65 deaths killed. Now, I think they should be given the proper status of what they are, and their deaths because of the Battle of Fromelles. Now, and the casualties, I don't know how many of those went on to fight another day, or might have died from the wounds, or who they might have been as casualties, but then we've got period B, running from the 19th to the 20th of July. Now, we have that chart already. I don't see that I can change those numbers as for the period of noon July 19 to 8 p.m. on 21 July, so I'm just going to leave them as part of this collation of dates and numbers. So we've already got 450, now we've got another 5,533. You see the numbers are getting bigger? We haven't even done the consolidation yet. Now, I need to have this.
Excuse me, why is there no missing? Normally missing is a column.
Missing?
Yeah, the column.
Depends when the figures were put together. This chart in front of me now was done in 1940. By which time those missing have been translated into others. Prisoners, deaths, or other wounded in actions. Okay? Good question. I can see someone's been critical of what I'm doing, so it's even better. That's a good question, and we appreciate asking. Now the next thing we've got to do is look at the consolidation of the area after the 21 July, when those numbers were supposedly settled upon by 1940. Now, period C, I'll call it. The date should, if battle orders prior to the battle and subsequently have followed, continue until 31 July. Well, that's when the 5th Division's war diary for the area came to an end. They'd moved on elsewhere after that, mostly towards Armentières. So what happened? The brigades occupied an extended frontage across that whole battle area. The 15th Brigade holding most of the frontage where the 19th and 20th July battle occurred, and the 14th Brigade holding the front near White Farm. The 8th Brigade held part of the battlefront elsewhere, also as part of those units. Now, I'm just going to cut to the end of this. By the time we tally those up, we find also that some of those battalions had minor casualties, and that small number of casualties. Some had none, some had already moved on. What we find is that the 14th Brigade was outside the area of the battle of the 19th and 20th of July. They don't report any casualties after the 20th of July. The 15th Brigade, they were in the same area as the battle of the 19th and 20th of July, clearing the battlefield, repairing the fences. And as the casualties are known for the post-battle period to 31 July, the casualties related to battlefield clearance and stabilisation can be separated from those related to activities outside the battle and shouldn't be included in the battle from casualty statistics. How many were there? It looks like there were 5 killed and 14 wounded, which makes 19, which were not part of the classification of consolidation of area as huts. Even though someone was killed in the area, the fighting had stopped, and where they were killed was not part of the consolidation area. So, coming on to our tally, I had in period A, 450 casualties, period B, 5,533, and period C, 109. So instead of 5,533, I think it's 6,092. Yes? Jim, you take note? Oh, 1 minute. Okay, so that's, as I said, it's more than what we've been led to believe or led to think for so long. Are they reflective? I think they are. And what's more, I think that this number is also something that should come front and centre. This is the number that I've traced of all the soldiers who died at Fromelles, or died of wounds from Fromelles, or died while they were prisoners of war who were wounded at Fromelles. They come from 14th of July through to as late as 1944. In my book I've got an extract from a soldier who wrote about the battle, who got brought home, 6 different series of operations, never left the hospital from the time he came home from Fromelles. He died in 1944. He should be counted. His wounds started at Fromelles. And we now have him as one of just 2,117 soldiers who deserve to be remembered as having died because of the Battle of Fromelles. So those numbers, what I've taken you through now, 6,092 casualties, of which 2,117 were deaths. In the 2 days of fighting, 1,827 were killed. 254 later died of their wounds. 479 were taken prisoner, of which 36 died from wounds sustained from Fromelles. It's a harrowing series of numbers, but it has to be recorded for correctness and for honour. And having written this book that took me 2.5 years, if I'd known it was going to be like this, I think I would have got on to Pat Farmer first of all and read the loneliness of the long distance runner, so I get an idea of just how tedious and time consuming it was all going to be. But those are my calculations. Those, I believe, are the true numbers, correct numbers that should be promulgated every time we talk about what were the battle numbers at Fromelles. I've given them to you. We'll see if we can get them to be accepted elsewhere. And now I'm going to finish off by saying many thanks to Paul Simidas, that man over there, him. Yes, many thanks to Paul Simidas for the Western Publication.
Let me say how pleased I am that you have been able to visit today and speak to us.
I came all the way back from Europe just so I could.
I know. And on behalf of the branch, I'd like to present you with a gift.
Oh, well, you didn't have to do that.
And
Well, you didn't have to do that.
now,
Go for it. I also want to thank someone, Paul, before you, can I? I want many thanks as well to Jim Munro, who assisted with the compilation of all these casualty numbers, who dug into the rabbit hole of all the war unit diaries for me, who came up with the calculations I contested or agreed with, and we put together as a result of that, and you get the benefit of it today. But also, I want to say many thanks to all of you for your attendance today and taking an interest in this topic as part of our history. So, thank you.